All right, let's bring in Richard Skinner, our expert, and people are going to be paying attention to this, Skinny.
I know that.
It's for their brackets and for maybe. I always advocate do not bet.
Well, and I have to talk myself into some of the things I'm about to talk about too. So there's that.
All right, let's do that. Let's take a look first. The Midwest has got a lot of the teams that we're really interested in. Starting with Xavier, which is a little short-handed. I think the Zach Fremantle thing showed up quite a bit in the having a 3 in 3 days, but now they'll have an off day in between, and they seem to figure some things out.
And that's the thing. I thought it was going to show up for the third time in 3 days, but in this tournament, it's 2 games in a 3-day span. You've got a day in between. You've got an extra 30 seconds on the TV timeout, and they have proven they can win without Zach Fremantle, and I think that's the big part. 3 games in 3 days was a big ask in that tournament, so I think that you have to wipe that part out if you're worried about it. If this was going to be 3 games in 3 days here, then I'd be worried. Right. It's not, so I think they can handle that situation.
All right, now in that bracket is Houston going against NKU. Now they're a 1 seed, even though they lost the championship on Sunday to Memphis, but I don't think their heart was in it. They knew they were going to be a 1 seed.
And they were missing a good player.
Does NKU have any hope whatsoever? I mean, that they have a little of everything.
They do, and I wish I could tell you yes. I will say this. They played Kentucky a few years ago in 2017 and played them tooth and nail, 72-64. They played 3-seed Texas Tech a couple of years after that as a 14 seed and played them tooth and nail. And that was a Texas Tech team that got to the championship game. Do they have a chance? Sure. Can I give you that they're going to be the second team as a 16 to ever beat a 1? I'm hard-pressed for that. I wish I could be better than that, Gary.
Yeah, well, maybe they cover at least, right?
Maybe there's that. There's always that thing. And we all know that's a big thing in March, too.
Let's take another look back at the bracket because IU really came on strong at the end of the year. They got a tough opening game,
I think this is a really hard opening game. I saw Kent State early in the year. They played NKU in their opener. They lost close games to Houston and Gonzaga.
Right.
They're really, really good. And I think IU's good. Trace Jackson-Davis is stupid good. Hood-Schifino, stupid, really good. But I'm telling you, that to me is one of the upset specials if you want to look at it. And if Indiana gets through that, I think they can make a nice run, maybe not to the Final Four, but through a bunch of it. But man, Kent State's really good. I thought the Kent State-Toledo game was a great MAC final.
Let's get back to Xavier for a minute. Clark Kellogg thinks they're going to the Final Four. What would it take for that to happen?
I shouldn't say not a lot. It does take a lot. I just think as long as they can stay consistent offensively, and I think that's where you saw their legs show up against Marquette. They were not very good offensively against
Kobe
Marquette.
Jones had done everything in those 2 games leading up, and he tried to do it again, and it just wasn't there.
Can't get in foul trouble, especially with your bigs, because you don't have a ton of depth. And they've done a good job of that part of it. But I think the legs were a real thing in Game 3. I don't think it's going to be a big factor in this, and I think because of that, I wasn't shocked they got a 3. I was pleasantly surprised, and that got you away from maybe playing a weird 4-5 game. You've now got a 3-6 matchup you can win. You start to look at it and you go, okay, I got a 2 seed I can beat. And so at that point, you're playing with house money. So I don't think it's a stretch for them to be a Final Four. I mean, they've only gone to the Elite Eight a couple times, but I do think that they've got a legitimate chance to get through this. I don't know if they do, but I really do love their draw and I love their team. I think they're really good.
Yeah, imagine if they had Zach Fremantle, but like you said, they've really adjusted to playing without him and have become a team that could still go far in this tournament. Let's look at the East now and the teams that we may have an eye on there, and that would start with Purdue's the #1 overall seed, and they kind of put it back together after having that slump near the in early March. Duke is in that region. I like Duke a lot as a 5 seed, but obviously we're going to wonder what happens with UK. And you talk about a tough opening match.
Yeah, well, I mean, Providence, they were struggling really down the stretch. You talk about a weird matchup. Bryce Hopkins, who was at Kentucky, transferred from Kentucky to Providence and was a big part of Providence's team. That team's not very deep. Well, Kentucky's not very deep either. Kentucky's a weird team. When they have things clicking, I think they're as good as anybody in the country, but we've also seen they can lose to Vanderbilt twice, which they did down the stretch. But from a draw perspective, I got to be honest with you, Gary, I'm not so sure it's a bad draw for Kentucky. I really don't. I think it's about as good as they could do.
As we looked at that bracket there, Memphis made some noise.
Yes.
Can they do like kind of what they did in the AAC tournament?
Yes, because the one thing is nobody has anybody that matches with Zach Edey, right? They just don't, right? Nobody has anybody can match with him. But Houston has a bunch of grown men, and they handled the grown men about as well as you could. Now, I think to your point earlier, Houston went, we're good. We're missing one of our better players in Sasser. We can do this. if Edey doesn't have a good game and he doesn't get in foul trouble, he's good at that. And if they somehow don't make shots from the perimeter, which, again, Edey masks a bunch of that. But if you decide we're going to collapse and say you guys shoot in a tournament environment and try to make, Memphis is more than talented enough to pull the upset. I still like Purdue a lot. I do think Purdue gets to the Elite Eight.
Let's get back to Big Blue for a second here. How do you explain what team shows up on what night?
Honestly, I don't think anybody can. I think some of it, Cason Wallace had just come back from a brief injury. He was out. He wasn't 100%. I think it's completely matchup driven for them. I think some of it's heart for them. It has been a weird thing. I thought the Arkansas game was like the final push of, okay, you're over the hump. You just won shorthanded without your point guard. You had Jacob Toppin playing point guard for most of that day, and it felt like they've cleared that hump. And then they go and play a Vandy team, which you owed them. They beat you on senior night, and then you still couldn't handle them. And yet every time they've been in this spot where you go, they're done, they managed to roll off 2 or 3 wins in a row. And based on their draw, I think their draw is as good as they could have gotten. So I think at that point you go, it wouldn't shock me to see them wake up and be in the Elite Eight, for goodness sakes.
Right. Either that or lose like they did last year to St. Peter's.
Correct. In the first round of Providence, and Bryce Hopkins pays them back for transferring. Correct.
Right. And the other surprise there was that Vandy didn't get more recognition and get into the tournament the way they played.
If they could have gotten one more win, I think they had a real good shot to do it.
All right, Skinny, now time to look at the other half of the bracket. Let's start in the South with the #1 overall seed, Alabama, which has had a lot of off-the-court issues, but it hasn't bothered them at all. What's amazing to me about Alabama, Skinny, is that, you know, Brandon Miller's going to hear it from the opposing team, but it hasn't seemed to bother him. He's playing some of his best basketball.
Well, I think to your point, I think he's already heard it. He's heard it on numerous occasions on the road, on neutrals, all those things, and it doesn't affect him whatsoever. We can argue the whole merits of what's going on and all that, but it's not affected him. And you know, you talk about a team that passes the eyeball test. They pass it. They're long. They shoot it. They guard. But they haven't been in this spot before. And I think there's something to be said for that. You can argue that maybe it doesn't matter, but I do think it does matter. We'll see how they handle the real pressure of that. There was not a lot of pressure in the SEC tournament for them. There's a lot of pressure now because they are the #1 overall seed.
Yeah, and they got there by playing that tough SEC schedule.
Yep.
In this bracket is a team that's always tough. Doesn't have quite the talent to make a deep run, but a Huggy team is a team you never want to face.
Exactly. And you know what's funny? You look at them; they were 7-11, I think, inside the league. Had some bad losses, but you know here they are. You're thinking that's a play-in team at the best, and they got honored by being an 8-9 seed game. And I wouldn't want to play them. And I'm going to guess from an Alabama perspective, they're going to look up and go, you know, I hope they don't win because they are going to be tough. They are going to be physical. And he's been through this so many times that he knows how to prepare teams for this kind of stuff. So you're right. I think it's a scary opponent.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later about our surprise teams, and we'll get to Skinny's Final Four, but I think that's a team that could really give Alabama problems if they can make it through. Anything else of the South that sticks out to you?
Yeah, no, I mean, for the most part, you know, you look at it, I do like Creighton a lot. I think that's a great matchup with Baylor. I don't think Baylor's great. I think Creighton's really good, and especially on a neutral floor. And then you look at the bottom. I like Arizona a lot, and I do think they get past that Missouri game. But I think Creighton's a chance to get to an Elite Eight, and an Elite Eight Creighton team on a neutral floor can score it. Now, they haven't done that either in their history, but I think they're really talented. I think the Big East is really good.
Yeah, Creighton, Arizona, that's a winnable game for Creighton, and that'll get you to where you want to go. Now let's look at the West, the final bracket, because none of our local teams made it out there, but it does have Kansas as a 1 seed that some people think is the overall #1, even though they weren't given that distinction.
I was shocked they weren't.
And, you know, I think we heard the committee talk about it, one of the guys representing the committee on the CBS broadcast, and they weren't sure. That we heard the news on Sunday that Bill Self was out of the hospital. He will be there to coach that game, but they mentioned that might have been a factor in maybe knocking them down one notch.
I know I can't believe that would be a case. I cannot believe. Look at the body of work. Just go with the body of work. That's the bottom line to it. But I'll tell you what, they face a really tough second-round opponent, either Arkansas or Illinois. Illinois is so goofy.
Right.
They can lose to literally anybody in this country in a quad four, and I think they're so talented they could win this second-round game. So Kansas got zero break where this is concerned, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think both those teams.
Yeah,
and both of them have been very disappointing.
Uber talented.
Right.
And sometimes in the tournament, that's all that matters is uber talented.
Now let's look at the bottom half of the West and that side of the bracket. And
this is my favorite part to the bracket. I love Gonzaga. I think they got a great draw. I think, you know, UCLA, if they weren't so banged up, they lost their best defensive player in the regular season and lost to Arizona. Tiger Campbell, I mean, this was my team last week before the Arizona regular season game. I thought had a shot to win it. I still think they do. Tiger Campbell's great. Jaime Jaquez is great. mixed great, all those things, and they've done it before with this group. But man, that injury really, I think, has affected them enough to where Gonzaga's a 2-3 seed game eventually is a really tough spot for UCLA.
Well, you kind of hinted at it there. Let's get Skinny's Final Four.
All right, we'll start in the one region we just did. In the West, I'm going Gonzaga. I think them, and I love UConn from the top to be the two teams in the Elite Eight.
UConn, well.
I think UConn's really talented. I'll go to the East. We'll kind of go backwards here a little bit. In the East, I do think Purdue is going to have a hard time not getting out of the top bracket, but Tennessee, to me, has enough talent to maybe knock them off. Yes, correct. And the bottom part, I'm a Kentucky grad who has a hard time struggling with John Calipari, but I'm going to have to like it. I think they string together enough wins to get to the Elite Eight, but they don't beat either one of the teams from the top bracket, either Purdue or Tennessee, even though they've beaten Tennessee twice this year. In the Midwest to me it's Houston's to lose. I think Xavier has a legit chance to get the Elite Eight. I don't say that lightly, but I do think it's Houston's to lose. I think they got grown men who they guard you, they score it, they all rebound, they all defend, and I'm a huge fan of them. And then in the last region, this is the hardest one for me because I want to pick the chalk in Alabama. But I'm going to go, this is going to be the upset special bracket for me. I'm going to go Creighton getting to the Final Four, as goofy as that sounds. And it's goofy. Just the way I look at the matchups, I think they got
after
a legit chance
to get through. After what they did against Xavier Friday.
I know. And that's sometimes you look and you go, that's goofy, but sometimes it's all about matchups. It's
this
all
year
about
would
matchups.
be the year that anything really can happen.
Correct.
Now, I do think the UCLA injury could hurt them, but I just think they've got a little of everything.
I'm with you, and I
like them.
I mean, if you gave me 3 or 4 teams to win it all, they would be one of the 3 or 4. With Gonzaga, unfortunately, they're in the same side of a bracket.
Right, and they got Timmy coming back.
Yes, correct.
He's already done it all.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah, I'm with you almost all the way on those. What do you think? Do you think NKU leads for a little while against Houston on Thursday?
So when I would coach basketball at Beechwood and we would play Moeller, occasionally we would get a lead on Moeller and I'd take a timeout and take a snapshot of the scoreboard. Maybe that's what you do. You take a snapshot of the scoreboard. I think it's a fun. If you're them, this is what you want. You just want to be a part of this. And then if you can just grind them out for enough to make it sweat. And we've watched it happen before. We've watched teams make them sweat. And there's a bunch of sweat teams. Kent State's going to make a team sweat. Drake's going to make a team sweat. Or Roberts is going to make a team sweat. I hope NKU can somehow make a team sweat. It would be so cool to watch.